This is Space Cat's Peace Turtles, the unofficial podcast for Fantasy Flight's Twilight Imperium. Episode 66, In Maps We Trust. Music by Ben Prunty, featuring Matt Martins and Hunter Donaldson. Good morning, Hunter.
Yeah, yawn. Oh my god, yawn. I'm so tired because
sleepy boys.
I'm so sleepy, and I hope you're listening to this really early in the morning too, so maybe you're sleepy.
Yeah. Good morning, dear listener. Today on ASMR SCPT TI4 TTS.
Oh my god, that would actually be a really good podcast. Is a podcast where we talk about Twilight Imperium to make you go to sleep.
Yeah, I isn't that what this podcast is? I thought. That's what
yeah, I forgot.
The whole time.
So welcome to the Sleep Aid podcast that it's always been. I don't know why people get so excited about it. It's like, are you guys going to sleep or not? You guys are supposed to go to sleep, okay?
This wasn't for conversation. This is for sleepy time.
Yeah, it's like people keep sending us stuff and talking about the game all the time. I'm like, you're not supposed to be playing the game. You're supposed to be going to sleep, all right?
Come on now.
You got work to do in the morning.
Well, we're both a little bit sleepy because we're in the middle of this tournament, and it's really games back to back. We're watching 2 games this weekend, 2 games next weekend. That's not a complaint, by the way. I hope that didn't come off as like we're exhausted from watching so many games. It's just that we're trying
exhausted from watching so many games. Okay,
But we're gonna. So we have an episode proper today, but of course we had a game that we've got to talk about. We gotta break down a little bit of the game we saw. We're recording this Sunday morning before our second game, so unfortunately for this episode we're not gonna have 2 games to talk about, but we might have 3 games to talk about next week. It'll depend. But we do have a game to talk about. So I want to start diving into it. But just to let you know, too, though, today's episode is not just that. So if you're looking for your normal Space Cats Peace Turtles content, never fear. Today is a Space Kitty episode that we did with InMapsWeTrust. Hence today's episode, In Maps We Trust. We're going to have a conversation with Mac about map building and the crazy maps that he makes, as well as a bunch of just normal ideas within map building. And if you want to listen to just that and you don't really care about the tournament, or you want to avoid spoilers of the tournament and you want to listen to this portion of the podcast after you've watched the game, you're going to go ahead and jump to a time code that Matt from the future is going to tell you right now. 58 minutes. Thanks, Matt. Thank you so much for doing that for me. I appreciate your future wisdom and your courage and your spirit and your honor.
Wow.
Really, thank you so much.
Does Matt from the future know what happened in Game 3, though?
Maybe. I'm not going to have time to edit this before the game.
I think Matt from the future should throw in a little nugget about, the game where we've yet to watch.
Oh, yeah.
That might be fun.
He's going to do that. He's going to give us a little nugget.
And Powerball numbers for tomorrow.
Okay. And whoever's going to win tonight's hockey game.
And he's got to sleep with his grandmother. Oh, wait, no, that would be the past. Well, no, it could be in the future, too.
Because Matt's grandma from the future is there.
Right.
Oh, man. But
His grandma traveled to the future from the past. A sexy, younger version.
Oh, no.
And then
I hate this.
Matt from the future fell for her.
Can we move on?
All right, so game number 2. How did it start? It was an interesting round 1, and I got to see I was popping in and out of the game because I had a busy, crazy Saturday.
But let's dive into first thing. How did the draft go? The draft was fairly. I would say this is our first standard draft. This is what I expected drafts to look like. Game 1 was, I would say, defined by its kind of crazy draft and the factions that ended up in it. This one is like, if you listen to our drafting episode, these are the factions we expected to get into games.
Well, what factions did we have, Matt?
So we had the Mentak Coalition, played by Dimitri. We had the Necrovirus, played by Alex. We had the Yin Brotherhood, played by Furious George. We had the Isarl Tribes, played by Mark. We had the Barony of Letnev, played by Imson. Arborek by Dodonko, and that's it. That's all of our players. So, pretty standard, like middle upper tier factions, right? I mean, that's a pretty standard draft. And as luck would have it, the first rung of the draft was everyone picking factions, which meant the final player to pick actually had first pick of any slice. And so we had Arborek in Slice of the Gashly, which also feels like just a really standard thing that should happen in a lot of games. You know, the lowest tier faction was in what's regarded as the highest tier slice, and the highest tier faction was kind of in the low. You know, Dangerous Diplo was the final slice chosen, which I think most people think of as the kind of worst slice.
I thought people thought Fast and Cultured was the worst slice.
It's back and forth, you know, but both of them have their ups and downs, and so it depends on the factions that end up in there. Do we want to go around and say who was in which slice?
Yeah. I think it's good to, because I think there are some people that know the map really well, and that it'll be helpful to those people. So
Arborek, like I just said, was in Slice of the Gashly. Going clockwise from there, in Big and Tight was the Necrovirus. On Necrovirus's other side was the Barony of Letnev in Fast and Cultured, which is a good slice for Barony of Letnev. A blue and a red skip.
I agree.
That becomes pretty good. In Little and Tight was Mentak Coalition, another solid like matchup between the two of them. In Darien Slice was Yin Brotherhood.
Yep.
So far, many solid pairings. And then in Dangerous Diplo was the Isarl Tribes, which I think is fine. I wouldn't say it's especially overpowered or anything, but it's you know, it's a good faction to be there.
I mean, Isarl's so great that, I mean, you give them...
They could kind of just exist in
it's fine,
slice, really.
Yeah.
I don't really know if I care what slice Isarl ends up in.
Right.
A green skip is good, and that would be nice.
Yeah.
But you don't need it. So.
Yeah, I actually don't even know if green skip is good, because I like all the green... the green path
every
for
green tech
Isarl's great. So
yeah, you're right. There's nothing to skip. I almost forgot that transparistile plating is one green requirement, so you get your max of skip right there. So yeah, actually no, you don't want, what you want is maybe a blue skip.
Blue skip would be cool
if you're looking to avoid
anti-mass maybe. Yeah.
But even then, sometimes you want anti-mass, and then in Dangerous Diplo specifically, you kind of want an anti-mass. So yeah, I don't know. Anyways, going into round one, I don't know. Hunter, did you have any favorites for this game? Did you think anything about the kind of makeup of the map and how you expected things to go?
Well, I had a weird feeling in the air that was making me look at Necro's play, because Necro did something that I thought was really genius in round one. Necro took trade. Yeah. And I believe they were like third or fourth pick. So it was like it was like, okay, they're going for trade.
Right.
And this is how they negotiated their round one trade. They said, all right, they played the trade card before they could trade with anybody. And they were like, all right, I will refresh one of my neighbors, but they have to send a ship over here to initiate the trade. Right. Which I thought was like, wow, this is...
What a deal.
Because they're Necro, they're going to destroy the ship and take the tech.
Exactly. And even more conveniently, Arborek was, of course, the neighbor that wanted to take them up on it. Arborek is desperately in need of money round one. So Arborek was like, yeah, okay, I'll send a cruiser straight, right away, sir. I'm on my way.
Yeah.
Because Arborek needs that money, and Necro wants especially a cruiser from Arborek. I mean, that's going to maybe be Sarween tools. You could let it sit there and eventually get like Latani 2 or Neural or like there's a lot of tech that Necro could use to farm that. That got turned a little bit sour though at one point.
It was like I think maybe the player I don't want to try and figure out what they were thinking. But they attacked early. They attacked before the Arborec could research any tech, and all they ended up getting out of it was Magen. I thought it was a play for this round. I thought they were just like, well, they're getting Sarween. It wouldn't be bad to have Sarween, so I'll get Sarween, you know?
Right. Yeah. I just realized I misspoke, too, and I already can sense the errata in the air. I know that Necro starts with Daxiv, and I know they don't need to copy Daxiv from Arborec. Thank you. Okay. Got it. But yeah, I hated
why would Arborec even have Daxiv?
They start with Daxiv.
No, Arborec starts with Magen.
Oh, Arborec. No, I'm talking about Necro. Necro. Okay. I said Necro would want to copy Daxiv.
Well, now I have an errata for you. Okay, I thought you said that they were getting Daxiv from Arborec. That's what it sounded like you said.
Thank you for your errata submission. We'll see if it makes it into the episode.
Well, it better.
But no, yeah, I was really sad to see Necro jump on Magen like this. I think maybe they were just afraid of that cruiser leaving next round, or just the timing of when they needed to start moving their ships out. I think they were a little bit anxious to see them lose their bait. And one of the first objectives out was 2 tech and 2 colors. So I think in their head it was like, I just need to get this done. I just need to move in a direction of some tech, get it, and hope for the best later down the road.
Well, I want to say I like the play even if you're not Necro and it isn't about like an aggressive second part. I like the play just as like, I mean, I just think it's smart because a lot of times the person with trade is the one that goes out of their way and puts a ship in a place to trade with. But I think just saying like, no, if you're gonna trade, you gotta come to me. To a faction like Arborec or like Sardak Nor, like factions that like they don't have, like, you have leverage over them automatically, basically.
Right.
Like, I think recognizing that, I don't think every faction's gonna be like, all right, sure. Like some are. It just depends on where they're at. Like some people I think love trade so much that they will sometimes like over prioritize it and like, you know, send who knows what.
Right.
But I just thought it was a cool move, and I think I will probably steal it in the future, like, and use it for myself. That's how much I liked it. The other really notable thing about round 1 is that Arborec had just the wildest,
the craziest round 1. So I want to break it down because there are many steps, and the first and most important part of all of this is Arborec made a gamble round 1, a dangerous gamble.
Yeah.
But it 100% paid off. I mean, it was the luckiest Arborec round 1 I've ever seen, but also the best played Arborec. Like, he took the luck and used every ounce of it. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, the sign of a great player is, okay, you were willing to make the gamble, and it's not like it was a stupid gamble. It was just like I'm going to take my chances on this.
Right.
And he did the secondary of politics.
Mm-hmm.
To get 2 action cards, which is kind of like, as Arborec, you're like, no, you need tech, and Arborec had warfare. Arborec got the tech, but we were afraid of him not being able to do the secondary of warfare. Is that right?
No,
I am getting it backwards.
Yeah, you're messing it
up.
Arborec
had warfare.
Arborec
had warfare, and we were afraid of them, doing the secondary of tech, and then what else are they going to do the secondary of? They chose to do politics. Which in some games could end up being like you kind of just burned a command counter round 1. Like, if you don't get great action cards that pay off, it may have been a wasted thing. But you take the hit, you still got a command counter, you're still going to be able to do tech. But the tech person was actually kind of stalling tech out. Arborec, because Necro was making the deals they were making, their first action was to send a cruiser over in the Necro system, so no expansion.
Right.
And then the cards that they drew were the action card that lets you research tech for 4 trade goods. And the other action card was frontline deployment, which is 3 ground forces on any planet. So Arborec round 1, that's huge. I mean, that's 3 more production. You're already starting off on a big foot. And both of those action cards are delays.
Right.
So
that's three actions.
Right. Yeah. 3 actions before he had to do anything. And then his 4th action was to move ships out. He even could have, we had counted it out, where he could have done 6. Playing warfare didn't have to be anything until his 6th action.
Right.
He ended up doing it on his 5th, but that stalled every single player on the board out of warfare, except for technically Barony didn't have to get stalled out of it, but Barony didn't want to waste all of the... Barony who picked leadership, but Barony wasn't wanting to just burn command counters just to do the secondary of warfare.
Right.
So he ended up, nobody got the ability to refresh off of warfare and then still move those carriers out in round 1. When we talk about stalling out warfare, we're not saying that the person's not allowed to do the secondary of warfare, but it's that you can't use that new carrier you just built to then move out round 1 and get new planets. So Arborek successfully stalled people out, which for Arborek is huge because it puts them back on like kind of an even playing field, right? Arborek has a terrible start. So getting really lucky round 1, I remember all of us were kind of like, oh my gosh, Arborek is like on track now. Not ahead, but this puts Arborek at level playing field with everyone else.
I want to even think about how much of a gamble was that? Like, should that maybe even be standard now for Arborek? Because
if you get tech or warfare, if you get one of the strategy cards that you would otherwise be using your counter on, it's not a bad idea. The other thing to note is they used the action card to get the tech instead of doing the secondary of tech.
Right.
So they got to control the timing themselves as long as they got the 4 trade goods, which was part of kind of their deal with Necro. They ended up getting 4 trade goods out of all of it. But they just went ahead and bypassed the need of spending another command counter. So they went into round 2 with 1 extra command counter than basically they expected to have, which helped open up their options round 2 of kind of re-maneuvering all their stuff around and building up even more. But yeah, I don't know if I would call it the new standard because, again, you could end up with a bunch of junk. You could end up with 2 action cards that do nothing for you, and you wasted a command counter round 1. So I don't know. I think it paid off for them, but I don't think it's a play that's good enough to make a part of your play no matter what or anything like that. I think it just depends on a lot of factors, and they chose to go for it, and it worked. But I think you could see plenty of games where it doesn't.
Yeah. Cool. Well, so after round 1, I basically had to peace out, and then I came back when you guys were in the late game. So what happened? Let me know what was that mid game like?
What's funny for you is when you came back in the late game, it almost felt like not a ton.
Yeah, I was gone for a long time, but it didn't feel like a lot had happened. Yeah,
right. Obviously a lot had happened, but to go over it pretty quickly, round 2, Mentak had some kind of interesting mismanagement of his ships, so it kind of Mentak was getting set back in a board position sense, but he finished taking a slice and was staying in the lead. Mentak was, I think, tied with the point leader round 2, or I think maybe everyone may have been tied round 2. And round 2 is also when Necro started attacking Arborek. He moved into Lazar Sakulag, which is the system adjacent to Arborek's home system. And his only purpose for doing so was he's Necro. He needs to get tech. So there's 2 tech, 2 colors on the board. So he's just trying to farm tech. But the attack that he launched did not score a single hit.
Whoa.
He sent in a fleet. Arborek retreated. Necro's Dreadnought missed. The fleet got away. And then the ground combat, he missed his ground combat shots, and the other ground forces scored their hits. So a pretty much wasted attack for Arborek.
Or for Necro.
Or in that fight, there may have not even been ground combat. He may have not been able to do it. I forget. But regardless, he didn't get any tech. And that was kind of his only purpose for doing anything aggressive towards Arborek.
I'm actually curious because it did sound like, and it looked like once I had returned that there had been a lot of aggression between Arborek and Necro. Did Necro ever strike out against Barony? Because I always felt like Barony is probably more. Well, I don't know. They both got juicy faction tech, right. But I feel like Arborek doesn't reliably research a lot of tech, whereas Barony does. So
yeah, I think the play was early game. It became about Arborek's the easier one to attack. Barony's got a Dreadnought. Barony's going to build a big fleet. Barony could easily retaliate. Might as well try to pick off the weaker Arborek fleets. And it kind of became a sunk cost thing. I mean, he spent a bunch of ships to get over there and then didn't get any hits. But Arborek's ships were still reduced a little bit, and he had taken just Arborek's time away from him. So it's well, I better do it again. And it kind of just became that of Necro sort of kept stabbing at Arborek every now and then, and Arborek would try to negotiate Necro away from them. But I think at any point Necro could have turned his tail and gone the other way and just tried to rebuild. But because that tech objective was just constantly on his mind. He was just trying to get that done and out of the way, and it took him a while, just because of how things kind of kept working out for him. Some other notable stuff from round 2 is Isarl got Magion implants round 2.
Ooh.
So he played tech round 1 and got 1 green, and lucked out to get tech again round 2, and so then he bought 2 tech round 2 to get hypermetabolism and Magion implants.
Wow, weird.
So Isarl had gone all the way down his tree by the end of round 2.
That's awesome.
Which was pretty cool, except for there was 2 techs and 2 colors out, so he was kind of opting to ignore that and say, yeah, I'll get it later, which I don't mind, honestly. I've gotten to the point where I'm like, there's no need to rush to get tech objectives when you can easily score them in another round later on, as long as you're still scoring some other objective. Obviously, it would be bad if you weren't scoring any objective at all and then didn't get the tech objective. That kind of sucks. But if you're getting, all the objectives in the stage 1s were like economic, spend 5 trade goods, spend 8 influence, all that kind of stuff. So they were keeping up with that and just opting to get the tech later. And the other thing is Yin took Mechatol Rex round 2. So we had a round 2 agenda phase. I don't remember all the exact agendas, but going into round 3, now Isarl started also applying a little bit of pressure to Arborek. There was always kind of a thing of quiet pressure. It wasn't like Arborek or Isarl started moving into Arborek space, but like Necro and Isarl kept having secret conversations. And so Arborek was like, well, that is about me then, I guess, obviously. And so even though by round 4 or 5 or something, Arborek was starting to say, Isarl, why have you been so mean to me all game? And Isarl was kind of being like, I mean, technically, I've never done anything to you. I've never actually attacked you,
right?
But maybe one time or something, I forget. But the aggression was like on a meta level, like he felt the aggression from both of his neighbors.
Right.
He only actually got hit by Necro, but there was obviously kind of plans being made between them. But it wasn't enough pressure to crush him. Arborek was still doing okay, and he had enough of a slice to survive.
What do you think was what was Isarl looking at for Arborek? Just like or like was there control objectives that Isarl needed, or like what do you feel like made Isarl lean that way versus leaning? Because it sounds like really and this might be something we see more and more in the tournament, is just that some of the players were like, well, I'm going to put a lot of pressure on a faction that is regarded as weaker.
Yes.
But then the two stronger factions, I mean, probably the strongest faction, I don't even think that they were, well, the strongest faction is probably Isarl. But like
at this table, yeah.
Barony,
I would say so.
Barony would probably be second for most people. And it's just weird that it sounds like Barony was not really checked in any way.
Right. I mean, I think for Isarl, it was more about, again, it was mostly like spendy objectives. So in reality, Isarl was just sitting in their own slice, minding their own business. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if there was if anything, it was more Necro always coming to Isarl and saying, hey, I want to have a secret conversation with you. So I don't know. I don't know if I could even say really what the pressure was. I know Arborek felt that pressure, but I don't really know what Isarl's reasoning was for engaging in those conversations and being part of that sort of like meta pressure. But yeah, I don't know. I think it didn't end up crushing Arborek or anything, at least not at this point. Later, Arborek's game continued to go south just because the pressure never let up. But by this point, I kept feeling like Arborek could come back from this. They're actually going to be fine, was my main opinion. Also, round 2, Necro did manage to get Magion implants. This was part of the deal. Like it wasn't just that like Necro jumped on Isarl. They kind of worked out a way to let Necro get some tech. So that was part of Arborek feeling that pressure. Is like these two guys are like feeding off of each other and working together a little bit. And then Dido offered a support for the throne.
You mean Arborek?
Dido is Arborek, yes, sorry. Right. Arborek offered a support for the throne and a political secret to 2 neighbors to use sabotages against cards that were being played against him. I think one of the cards was from Isarl and one was from Necro. I'm not sure. That's the kind of aggression Isarl was doing to Arborek, was just like
cards,
throwing kind of junk action cards at him and hurting him a little bit. And he was getting sick of it, so he started offering up big stuff to people who would play their sabotages against those cards. So he ended up they were both non-binding deals, but I believe he got maybe Mentak's support for the throne. Or vice versa. I mean, he gave Mentak a support for the throne for the use of one sabotage, and he gave Yin Brotherhood a political secret for the use of one sabotage.
Mm-hmm.
But he had to transfer both of those during the agenda phase. But going into round 4, Mentak has a support for the throne, and that's what started to push Mentak ahead, because then, and I don't remember the rationale for this, but Barony and Mentak did a support for the throne swap. They both just wanted to secure their borders and focus on their other neighbors. And this put Mentak at 4 points, and that was the lead, I believe. It was 4 or 5 points, maybe. But Mentak had kind of a clear lead, and Barony was a little bit more in the pack, which I thought was a beautiful play because it netted Barony a point, but it made Mentak look like
the one to watch.
Right.
Yeah.
So already people were sort of kind of wanting to deal with Mentak a little bit, but it did set up a strange border issue, especially in the later game. I mean, that support for the throne lasted through to the end of the game, but it became an issue for how those two players were going to deal with each other when it came to final game or final round shenanigans.
And how has Barony's game been? We barely talked about Barony at all up until this point. How has Barony been doing?
When you watch the game, you're going to hear us saying, I don't know what Barony's path to success is here. I had started to give up on Barony. I saw the support for the throne play, even though I liked what it did for him. He wasn't getting ahead with it, and I didn't see him obviously going for any objectives. But again, I think that's kind of the feeling of spendy objectives, is you're sort of like, well, you don't have to do anything especially active. You just need to get the money and spend it.
Right.
So I just wasn't seeing Barony do anything specific. But round 4 is where that turned around, basically. The first 3 rounds, I just was like, I don't know what Barony's doing. I remember feeling that way about Mentak, even though Mentak was getting a lead. I was like, I don't understand what Mentak is, like, doing. I don't know what he's setting up for. Versus, like, Necro was making active movements on the board. Asaro was playing action cards and doing things to, like, secure their slice. But it just kind of felt like Mentak was maneuvering around weird, and same with Barony. Barony kept like moving their ships around in weird ways. I know the biggest thing with Barony, the reason I felt like they weren't going for the right objectives was they started with have 5 dreadnoughts on the board, or maybe that was their second secret objective, but they just weren't. One of their first builds was to build their flagship. They built their flagship round 2, which to me is sort of that's dangerous. Flagships usually don't need to come out that early, and you should have spent that $8 on 2 dreadnoughts. You need to be working on stockpiling your dreadnoughts because you need to do that objective at some point.
Well, let me ask you this: what? Because I don't see it in the notes here. When did Because by the time I came back, because we're about now to the point where I would basically be back. Mechatol was owned by Barony. Barony owned Mechatol. So when did that change hands, and what was the circumstances of it?
Right. So I'm trying to remember, and I might get this wrong, but I know Yin had to abandon it at one point, or somebody else jumped on it, and then it was left empty, and Barony took it when it was empty. No, the empty. Man, you know what? Honestly, I do not remember.
But the point is, it was kind of uneventful. Like it wasn't Barony didn't
major plays exactly
snatch it from someone's hands. Like it would just kind of got like. It just got confused.
There wasn't enough on it, and he got to take it, and it was not like a momentous occasion, except for then nobody else was really jumping on it. I believe Barony got 1 Imperial point off of Mechatol.
Right.
But the bigger thing is, in the round 4 agenda phase, everyone was kind of at even level, maybe like 5 points, with maybe I think Mentak 1 ahead, or maybe it was 4 to 6. Mentak had like a slight lead, and then Barony got the Crown of Amphidia.
Yeah.
And Barony had 2 secret objectives that we were counting out, and we knew Barony could do. Most players had 1 secret objective that was definitely accomplishable, but their second secret objective would be something really difficult. Barony had 2 very easy to accomplish secret objectives, plenty of stage 1 public objectives that they could still score. And so as soon as Barony kind of lucked into getting the Crown of Amphidia, basically the rest of the table just didn't put enough votes on one person to not let them get it. So Barony got to spend all of their votes on themselves to get it. Basically unavoidable.
It was really wild because it was basically like the second Barony got it, we just basically nonstop talked about the path that Barony, because Barony had, so it was Barony with Speaker Token on Mechatol Rex.
Right. This was when they were going to get their Imperial point. That was the problem. And that was the sort of like undercutting part of it too, right? It was like Barony doesn't have a lead, but clearly they are about to get one.
Right. They're clearly about to get a lot of points out of this. And I just think that the what's weird is that the table on the other side of the table, when we're talking about, it's not like Necro gets any votes, but like Arborek and Isarl, there was just more, I think, distrust on their end. So I feel like in that, I don't know. Actually, no. It was hard to tell what they were thinking with that one.
Yeah.
I know we were really excited about the possibility of Isarl had repeal law in their action card hand, and we were really excited about the potential of Isarl getting Crown of Amphidia and then repealing the law and getting to keep the point forever. Which would have been super cool. But yeah, it just kind of like the agenda phase was like really heated, but then it just kind of ended uneventfully. Like Barony basically just sat there.
It was one of those situations of the first two people to vote. Nobody wants to pay them for their votes because there's too many other people that you're going to have to pay later on. So for Isarl, it's like, well, Mentak is first to vote. I can't pay Mentak for a vote right now because I need to worry about Arborek and Barony and maybe even Yin going just before me. But like Mentak being the first one to vote, I can't pay them. But then that meant Mentak voted for themselves, Yin voted for themselves, or something like that. You know, they just kind of threw their votes in a random direction.
Right.
And by that point, it was too late for Isarl to get enough votes on his side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, it's funny, like, you've brought that idea up a couple times, and I actually think that the way that you need to think about it is you just need to buy as many votes as possible to make it moot.
Right.
So I mean,
agree.
like,
I'm getting more and more on that side. I think that's the flawed logic that people use, that I've used many, many times, is like I can't pay the first person to vote. Sometimes that is true, but if you look at the vote counts, sometimes it's like, no, I gotta, and that's how I've been hosed on agendas before. Is someone was willing to pay the first person who votes.
I mean,
in our holiday spectacular, EJ paid off the first two people to vote, and that completely decimated my whole game. So you just have to be willing to like get the votes on your side when it matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just, if you want to win a vote reliably, you probably need two other people's votes. Yeah. And I think you have to kind of, I would love to do a whole episode on this, actually, because my logic is that the first person to vote, you actually just have to buy their votes, basically, regardless, because you have to get that lead started. Right. Yeah. So you make them an offer, and it's slightly worse than the offer you're going to make the second player.
Right.
The second player doesn't necessarily have to be the player right after them, but it probably needs to be that third player so that the last two players will just, or because you're going to be one of those players, whatever, it doesn't matter. So that the remaining players basically look at it and they're like, well, I'm not even going to bother throwing my votes at it. That's what you want. You want to create that situation.
Right. You want the last like two people to just abstain. Because it's like, it's too far ahead, and it's not worth me dedicating all my votes to this. So forget it. I don't care. If I could win it by dedicating all my votes, but in most cases, it's not going to be worth it unless it's like a game-winning point something like that. Most of the time, people are not going to be willing to pay too much.
I mean, the agenda phase that you're referring to with EJ, his offers was to the first player, which was me. Trade agreement, which was the perfect measured juiciness for me to be like, yep, taking that. And then the second offer was support for the throne. And it was for a public execution agenda. So like, and he was Isarl, so it was like critical that he do it that way.
Cards. Well, and it was that was a whole other story too of my bad being like, I was the speaker and I put public execution on top. What kind of absolute moron would make that stupid decision? So
right. Yeah, you didn't think about you being a target. You thought about Isarl more. Right. Okay, so let's get into it. So Barony gets Crown of Amphidia. We're basically going nuts at this point.
Right.
And we see the path. We see the path based on the idea that that public disgrace doesn't come out and ruin his Imperial grab. But it was an interesting situation because Barony and Mentak and even Isarl were all sitting in a row, and they were all pretty much jockeyed for winning the game. They were
Right.
all not necessarily within striking distance, but
Right.
like in better positions than the rest of the table.
Right.
So it was kind of a public disgrace nightmare. And I don't remember which player had public disgrace, but
it was Arborek.
Oh, okay. So it was really hard to tell if you public disgraced Barony, who was the speaker, and kept them from taking Imperial, if Imperial would have just like gone to then Mentak, who then would have maybe won with it.
Right. Yeah, you felt like you were king making, but even more so, I think, too, was the idea that nobody besides the Barony had a logical route to winning this round 5.
Right.
Whereas we could see the situation we were kind of foreseeing was, oh my gosh, Barony's going to win and nobody's going to see it coming. Everybody thinks there's going to be a round 6, but Barony could win it. But the reason no one's going to use their public disgrace is because they want to use it on round 6. So if Barony can strike everything they need to strike, check all their VP boxes, they're going to win before anyone realizes it's too late.
Yeah. And essentially, round 5 was, I mean, pretty much went exactly the way that we thought it would, with the exception of one very specific play. But like Barony did get Imperial. They got the Mechatol point. They claimed a public objective.
Yep.
They were set up to claim another, and they were trying to clean up their secret objectives. And they had one status phase and one action phase. The action phase was unveil flagship, which kind of makes it like, well, lucky they did build it early, because they did get that. And they were able to accomplish the status phase one, which was be adjacent to
what they did was they spent 8 influence during the round.
Yeah.
So what happened was we saw that their final 2 actions for the round was going to be they need to kill something with their flagship, they need to win a combat with their flagship, and they have 2 options, both being status phase scores. One was 2 systems adjacent to Mechatol Rex.
Yeah.
The other was 1 system adjacent to a player's home system.
Right. They're secret.
Obviously, the Mechatol Rex was a more difficult option, whereas Mentak, there was an empty space next to Mentak that they were easily going to jump on. Now, the question then became, what's the correct order to do things? At what point are you showing your hand that you're going to win this round? Right. So they were stalling, and they were just trying to do all this stuff just to like delay the inevitable.
And the table wasn't really seeing it. I mean, I'm sure maybe some of them like had them on their radar, but they had no way of knowing that Barony just had eked it out. Right. They were probably, a lot of players were probably thinking like Barony is a problem, Mentak is a problem, Isarl might be a problem.
Exactly.
That's too many people to be thinking about. But we were just freaking out because we could see that like Mentak and Isarl just didn't quite have it, and Barony was just right on the edge.
Right.
And I'm about to break.
So I think we all were interested in seeing, the flagship was sitting above Mechatol Rex, and there were lots of like single ships adjacent to Mechatol Rex.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, this flagship's just going to win any fight it wants to do.
Because why? Because what had happened to Isarl? I can't believe we haven't even talked like it before. Because so let me before we move on, because we're about to get to just end game talk.
Right.
I want to talk about this because when I left, Isarl had ships and looked like Isarl was having a normal start. And when I came back, Isarl had 1 dreadnought and 1 carrier, but I did not see all of the fighting that had supposedly occurred. Matt, what happened to Isarl's game?
So, second game in a row where Wormhole Research agenda came out, and Wormhole Research came out the agenda phase immediately after Isarl scored have ships in each wormhole. But to do that, they were in the dangerous Diplo slice, so they put a decent sized fleet in the wormhole right by them, but then they sent a major fleet over into the empty wormhole next to Barony, basically saying like, I'm going to put this here, and I do not want A, Necro to snipe it, and B, I don't need Barony to completely demolish this. I need to get this point. So they put almost their entire fleet's worth of ships in those 2 systems, and then Wormhole Research came out, and they got all of their ships nuked.
Just brutal. So
Second game in a row.
I just wanted to throw that out because Isarl had a good game, and just, you can't account for that.
Right.
Stuff.
Would have otherwise had a much more direct path to victory had they not lost all their ships that they were going to do a lot of work with in round 5.
It's stuff like that makes me like, I don't do this, so I'm saying this like I'm criticizing somebody else, but actually I really just want to start making more deals that involve political secret just for the off chance, just because who knows, maybe that's going to be the thing that swings it.
Right.
And political secret is the least valued promissory note, which should mean that you're willing to use it in all kinds of little deals, basically.
Right. So the big thing here then is I felt Barony was doing their final round play a little bit out of order because I think attacking with the flagship and killing something is sort of unstoppable, right? Like, especially in that situation, it's like it was going to be one ship, you're going to kill the thing, and you're immediately going to score the objective. So, boom, you should do that in like the middle of the round and get it done.
Yeah.
And people won't be onto you yet. They'll see you're trying to score an objective, but you're not. That's not your final point. You can't let that be your final point, or visibly your final point. But instead, Barony went with putting a large fleet adjacent to Mentak's home system, which is an obvious play for that objective. So people were already going, oh, Barony needs that secret objective. And then as soon as he launched an attack with his flagship, everyone was like, oh, he also is doing that secret objective. So suddenly that fight become, we must do everything in our power to stop Barony from scoring this objective.
Right. But, I mean, it really was all for naught because what happened when... So Barony attacked Isarl's, like, one dreadnought.
One little dreadnought. And he did it with just, like, a small handful of ships.
It was the flagship, a destroyer, and a dreadnought, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So they moved into a fight against a single Barony or a single Isarl dreadnought, maybe one fighter. I forget if there was a fighter, but the fight was obviously in Barony's favor, and Barony was doing fine. But the dreadnought scored one hit, so they took the hit on the destroyer rather than take the hit on the dreadnought because they didn't have dreadnought 2 yet, and
it was Isarl. So like
Isarl has a direct hit. There's no way Isarl doesn't have a direct hit.
That's solid logic. We would never criticize that.
We kill the destroyer. It's fine.
Yeah.
We then win the fight. We kill the dreadnought. And as luck would have it, Isarl has Courageous to the End. Courageous to the End is you roll 2 dice for the ship at the ship's value. So 2 dice on a 5. And for each hit, you destroy a ship. You do not score a hit. You destroy an entire ship. Which means non-Euclidean shielding is useless.
Yep.
And you're doing 2 on a 5. It's a dreadnought. Like that's about as good as a Courageous to the End as you can get. And Isarl got both hits. Flagship is destroyed. Dreadnought is destroyed. No ships left in the system.
It was so brutal. So like Barony basically had all of this come together and then is going to be sitting at 9 going into the next round, which we were freaking out.
Right. The other thing I want to point out is at one point, and this is why I also argue Barony should have launched the attack sooner, is at one point, the other system adjacent to Mechatolrix he could have attacked was a carrier of Isarl's. But because he delayed the flagship fight until the end, people were maneuvering things around, and the carrier either was killed by something else or it left. I forget exactly where it went, but the dreadnought became the only option. So if Barony had done the fight 2 rounds earlier and just killed that carrier, Courageous to the End certainly would not have killed his entire fleet, and he would have won the game.
Right.
Now, there's no way for him to know that, but I'm just saying I really do think launching the surefire action phase secret objective, you got to do that first, and then his very, very last action of the round should have been moving the big fleet next to Mentak. Because then when you make that move, everyone goes, oh, crap. He needs the other secret objective, and now it's too late for any of us to move in and attack that huge fleet.
For sure. But let me just say one thing in his defense. I agree with you. I think we are going to get this feeling, though, a lot while we're watching these games because we're watching them and not playing in them. And honestly, I watch for about an hour and then I'm like, I wish I was in this game. Like, I almost wish I could just like pop in. But I will say this. The table was not the table was aware of Barony, but they were not trying to stop Barony's play.
No.
And I think Barony realized that and was like, listen, as long as they don't see me winning this,
keep a low profile,
I basically have it. So I think the Unveil flagship, like getting that objective, would have caused a lot of heat to come at Barony. And I think they realized it and was like, I need to wait to get that heat because I don't know what's going to happen. There's an Isarl in the game.
Sure, there is an Isarl in the game. I guess my only other remaining argument against that is he had a ceasefire from his Necro neighbor, and he had swapped support for the thrones with his Mentak neighbor. So the two major people that are going to put him in check cannot attack him. So it's got to be an attack coming from across the board. So yeah, Isarl becomes really the only option.
But see, that was also really limiting to him and I mean that goes into play in the next round because Barony could not attack either. Well, Barony could attack Necro. It's just that
they would have to burn a couple actions to do it.
Yeah, it was going to be tricky. There was going to have to be some ceasefire maneuvering. Do we want to go into that? So the agenda phase for round 5 was essentially nothing. It was moot. Nothing really of note happened.
No, and it was intentionally so. Isarl had already been dunked on by Wormhole Research, and I remember Isarl, I think at one point even pled the case of, like, I put 2 junk agendas on here because the last thing I need is political execution or just, any agenda that is, like, crazy. When he looks at the 2 cards and he sees 2 nothing burgers, he goes, that's fine. I just need to be safe. Because at this point, by stopping Barony's now at 9 points, but Isarl is at, like, 8, and Mentak is at 8.
Yeah.
Isarl has a shot because Isarl is speaker. So Isarl needs nothing to happen in the agenda phase.
Yeah.
And needs to go into round 6, like, strong. So that's exactly what happened in that agenda phase. And we then were counting things out, and it basically came down to if Isarl doesn't win, because Isarl had Imperial. Oh, this is interesting, too, for that strategy phase.
Yeah, so public disgrace got really dunked on in this game.
Two things I actually was really upset about is Arborek got Magion implanted at least once, but I think even twice, and nobody ever took their public disgrace. Every time they stole something from Arborek, they took some other, a skilled retreat or a decent card, but I remember every time being like, oh my gosh, Arborek is sitting on this public disgrace, they need to get that from them. Mm-hmm. And we, at this point in the game though, round 5 status phase was the status phase that the action card discard pile got reshuffled. So we had gone like a round and a half knowing there were no more sabotages. All 4 sabotages had been burned. But then the entire discard pile got reshuffled into it, and like 3 people drew sabotages. So Isarl got very lucky, and one of the cards they drew was that sabotage.
Right, and let's talk about how lucky it was, because there were 2 cards. So the action card deck was down to 2 cards left.
Right.
So, and it was Isarl's. Isarl was first because they were speaker or whatever. Mm-hmm. They were drawing action cards first. They drew those 2. Obviously, there was no sabotage in that. You reshuffled the discard pile.
Right.
They drew a single action card. Their third, because they're Isarl, and that third was sabotage, which is wild because they were speaker. Arborek had public disgrace. Arborek goes to use public disgrace on Isarl, sabotage. And the most unlikely sabotage draw ever.
Right. You know what? To be clear, too, actually, I think because Isarl didn't draw first. You draw in initiative order, but Isarl had politics. So Isarl drew that sabotage off of the politics draw.
Oh, that's what it was.
They drew their 2... like you just said, and then the third one when they played politics was that sabotage, and then they drew 3 more during the status phase. But yeah, they you're right, they grabbed that sabotage as the only draw initially from the discard pile. But that meant Arborek played public disgrace, but sabotage came out. Isarl gets to keep Imperial, so now you're looking at Isarl is sitting on 3 unit upgrades, and that's the objective. Isarl's going to win it on their turn,
right?
If Isarl doesn't win it, Mentak has a very strange path to victory. And I remember there being like it's like, well, they need to draw this specific thing and they need this to happen for them. And it was kind of like ooh, they have a path, but it's really tricky.
It was the weirdest one, but also Mentak was strategically probably had the most solid position.
Exactly.
Like really solid like fleets, basically. They had Fourth Moon out,
right.
Which was perfect as a barony deterrent. Not that barony would attack Mentak because they had traded support for the thrones. Actually, Mentak in general, Mentak's late game play was really good. Yeah. I do want to add to going into the final round, barony had already rebuilt their flagship.
Right. They rebuilt it as like their final action of round 5. And
so essentially we have 3 players that could make it happen going into what is going to be the final round.
Because barony does still have a chance. Now, the question then becomes, does barony take the lowest possible initiative order or something else?
Barony had the most options in the strategy phase. I remember talking extensively about that. Like it didn't really like that was the thing I noticed was that barony did not need any particular strategy card, which made me feel like barony probably has this just through the sheer fact of they have the action phase secret. Yeah. And they're at 9. They just need to score unveil flagship.
Exactly.
That's all they need.
The problem is everybody at the table knows that they need to unveil their flagship.
Yeah.
So for me, I would have liked to have seen them pick Warfare, because then you get to move it, try for 1 attack. Maybe they skilled retreat out. You pull the token, you go again. Or at least, especially he was surrounded by problems, right? He was surrounded ceasefire on his right, support for the throne on his left. Warfare lets him activate a system of Necros, pull the token that you activated, and attack that system again or whatever.
Well, see, I get what you're saying. I think you're hindsight 2020ing it a little bit
because we were very into what they did pick.
What they did pick was so obviously Isarl has Imperial, and they still need to research their 3rd unit upgrade in order to win.
In the bag yet, right?
So barony takes tech almost as a because barony just needs to win before Isarl can score. So essentially, barony takes the tech card in order to just sort of say tech is not happening until I'm going to stall it.
Exactly. I'm going to say when Isarl gets to get their tech. I'm not letting myself be at the mercy of someone else maybe misplaying tech and handing Isarl the game. Now I'm taking tech because I'm putting it in my control.
Right.
And I loved that.
And I agree with you, though, had that not been a factor, the best play would have been Warfare. But we still saw, barony could probably make this happen without taking Warfare. But you're right. Warfare probably was the smartest pick.
Regardless, the events changed very quickly.
Yeah.
Because Isarl's home system got jumped on in the first round of actions. And they lost. They had a parlay in hand, but the player attacking had enough ground forces to attack one planet, get parlayed, and then attack the other planet and land on it. So Isarl lost their ability to score during the action phase. Like we said earlier, they had 2 ships on the board, so there was a basically 0% chance they were ever going to get their home system back, because there were 4 ground forces on the planet by the end of the action. So that opened up Barony's new avenue. Now Barony can play tech whenever.
Yeah.
And Barony still didn't have 3 unit upgrades, but Barony needs to win during the action phase, and I loved this because Barony's surrounded by ceasefire and support for the throne, as we've said. So Barony, with 2 blue tech already in hand, uses tech to jump up to Lightwave Deflector, as well as they skipped to Lightwave Deflector and they got Dreadnought 2, which is exactly what they needed. They need to jump through Mentak to attack somebody else, or they need to double activate Necro. And there was actually a couple easy fights they could have done on Necro, but because it was going to take so much time, they actually opted to take a huge, major battle against Yin that they were a favorite in because they have non-Euclidean shielding. They have their flagship. There was 3 dreadnoughts versus, I think, 2 Yin dreadnoughts, a destroyer with a Yin that has impulse core, which was fun. Basically, it was a very close fight, but in the end, it got left with 1 Barony flagship. Barony was terrified of direct hits, rightfully so. Yin didn't have any, but Barony was just killing off every unit beforehand. They ended up losing their dreadnought. They were left with 1 flagship against 2 sustained dreadnoughts, which, if you know the math of flagship plus non-Euclidean shielding, he was never going to lose the fight from that point on.
Right.
Because every round he gets to repair the flagship. At most, all Yin can do is 2 hits in a row, which get soaked by non-Euclidean. So at that point, it was over. He had won the fight. But we got to see it be very, very close. It became 1 flagship versus 1 dreadnought, and then a Barony victory. Imson was the winner of Game 2 of the Patreon tournament.
Right.
In a huge final, basically 2-round push. I mean, really 1-round push that got stopped, and then he still managed to succeed, which is hard to do, I think. I mean, usually you see one person get crushed when they're the leader, and then the next person in line wins it.
Yeah. Well,
this was not that.
I do want to call out who was that next in line person. Had we gone to the status phase, Mentak would have won handily.
Right.
And Mentak played very, very well.
Mentak played very well. They got 2 people's support for the thrones as Mentak. They only ambushed once. They very rarely were able to pillage. But like I kind of gave them a little bit of guff for mismanaging their ships round 2. But the rest of the game for them was like getting in a really solid position and always scoring the objectives they needed to score and just like playing a steady game. So yeah, they had a very, very close chance to winning that. Yeah, if Barony had lost that fight with their flagship, it was Mentak's game, and I don't think anybody had a way to stop them.
Yeah. Yeah, so really exciting Game 2 of the tournament. Obviously, we're going to see Game 3 later today.
Yep.
Half
an hour.
And half an hour. Oh, yeah, so we got to start moving. But yeah, the tournament has been so much fun thus far.
Yep.
It is crazy to me that our first 2 victors were an extra kingdom, and... Barony of Letnev. Barony of Letnev isn't as surprising, but I'm just happy that there is nothing predictable thus far about what faction is going to win. Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
yeah. It hasn't been Jolnar. It hasn't even been Isarl yet.
And that we've still it's not a rigid system. I didn't want it to be like you never see the really S tier factions. I think if a group of people decide, in their draft that they just want to go all out and have all the big factions in, they will be able to do that.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, there's going to be drafts where we're going to see someone, their starting hand is going to be Jolnar, Sol, and Sar. You know what I mean? There's enough drafting that's going to happen. That's going to happen at least once. So there's going to be games where there's too many big factions in the nomination process to not let them through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of variance. But it's time to. This is going to be a long one, let me tell you, because we still have an episode to do, Hunter.
Oh right, yes.
We're gonna jump into a conversation with Mac, where we're gonna talk about maps and map placement and all that stuff. So thank you for
it's so good. It's a great conversation. It's super good. You're gonna love it.
It was really fun to do this. We're recording this part after we've already had the conversation with Mac, and I'm really excited for you to hear his Space Kitty episode and everything he's got to contribute.
Yeah, let's get to that.
Today's a Space Kitty episode, and I want to introduce Mac, the cartographer of chaos. Mac, say hello.
Hello.
Hello, Mac. Today, we're doing Mac's Space Kitty episode. He's been a long-standing Space Kitty, and this is long overdue, especially considering the content of today's episode.
Right.
We need to make Mac atone for some sins, and we also just need to hear his philosophies on map building. This is going to be an episode about map building. Obviously, we've done an episode in the past kind of about like how we do our co-op map build, but this is going to be a little bit more broad into like just different things you think about with different styles of map making, and then getting into some of the really weird variants of map making, because Mac is typically a pretty big fan of that sort of shenanigans.
Right. And also I feel like one of the good things about Mac's philosophy about making maps is that I feel like you prioritize fun up there. I feel like, would you say that is true? Does that feel right?
Part fun, part lunacy. I mean, let's be real.
Yeah.
I'm a lunatic.
Yeah.
After watching the holiday episode, I don't think anyone could say I'm anything other than a monster at this point. So
right.
Fun is a weird word for that holiday spectacular.
Yeah, I don't know how that was fun for you, Hunter. I'm sorry.
I mean, I'm over it now. I mean, at the time, I felt... honestly, your map was not the biggest offender to me. It was it was just everything. It was a combination of everything.
Right. There were
coming
so many
together.
factors dragging that game on and making it kind of a dastardly experience.
But honestly, I loved a lot of the decisions that the map forced in round one. For those listeners that maybe have not seen the Holiday Spectacular, I would recommend that you... they can't view that episode yet, can they, Matt?
I'm telling you, I've been working on it, but that is a hard one to recover. That game has been corrupted to all get out.
Dang. Well,
but I'm still working on it. I haven't given up. I'll say that much. But it has been a struggle to make that one happen.
What would you say is the hook of this particular map? What is the thing that makes this once everyone sees it, which hopefully they will someday? What would you say is the number one thing to know about this map that you created, Mac?
So the main thing with this map, before anything else, I feel like I have to tell why I even created this map. So probably about 3 months ago, Unaligned Magi and I were talking about Eclipse randomly in the Space Cats Discord. And he was talking about how the map was set up on it, where everything starts in the second ring. As you go outward, the systems are worse. As you go towards the center, the systems are better. So that's kind of how the map design started. Then I realized that's boring because then there's really nothing on the outer center. If you have someone like SAR in this game, they're dead. You can't do anything as SAR. And Matt said one day, probably about 2 months ago, hey, can you make us a map for a random game we're going to play? So I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll throw all sorts of shade at you guys. That'll be fun. So the whole idea about this map is that I'm trying to force you to have more conflict. I'm trying to make it so that the first couple of rounds aren't just the normal, we expand into our pie slice and go from there. With this map, if you have some evil audience agenda members who are deciding that you have to go to have the objective where you have to go to adjacent to Mechatol, now everyone's there. So you really are forced into conflict in this map, but I made it in such a way that it's not something that you can just go and easily get objectives. If you look at the map design, all of the different planet types, it's not easy to get 4.
Right.
The 3 tech specialties in the middle are the best 3 planets, so are one of the best 6 systems, so people want to go there. The other 5 are thrown into where the home systems normally go, so now you got to go outwards for that too.
Right.
So it's designed to make the middle equidistant systems the home systems and make it fun at the same time, to where people aren't just going to build PDS rings and go, okay, well, now nothing can happen. You've got to have conflict in this map. You've got to actually partially play Space Risk.
Well, and so to give a kind of to give testament to that working out very quickly, I think it was like round 2 or 3 is when SAR realized they had better chances of winning if they stopped going for points and just tried to take out everyone's home system and threaten support for the thrones from everybody. Like, I'm going to build the biggest star ball I can, and I'll take every home system unless you give me support for the throne.
Exactly.
And that became his only goal. He stopped caring about any objectives and was just like, no. It's all about conflict and nothing else. So,
I think that also scans, though, just because it was Sean, and I think Sean generally is it down to kind of like undercut the stated purpose of the game and be like, no, I've made up my own game
this
now.
is my new game that I've decided to play. Right.
Yes. But yeah, I actually, I know it probably didn't seem like it in the video, but I actually really enjoyed the map, especially the dynamic where the audience forced us to almost instantly get into conflict with each other because they picked the having ships adjacent to Mechatol, which was essentially, I mean, very, very difficult to accomplish, but was going to right away force aggression. I liked that part. It was only when too many of the audience agendas were stacking on top of each other that my mind turned to goo and faded away, and I became some sort of strange animal.
Well, what got sad was it started to get so far away from the original design of the map that, like, I want to now do another stream where we just play on the map, but play standard rules for everything else, because it will still have an insane outcome in terms of how the players have to play. So if anything, Mac's map didn't get its due diligence just purely because by the end of the game, too many insane things were happening that we couldn't do what the rest of the map was supposed to to kind of incentivize. So I am practically already committing to playing on that map again in some future stream.
Yeah, I would like to. I really dug it. But Mac, was there anything that you would have changed about that map at this point? Like, if you had another whack at that one, is there anything you think you would update, or do you feel like because I mean, it's hard for me to remember exactly remember the map perfectly, but I just wonder if there's anything you would have changed.
Oh, I have the map up, so I can look at it and tell you exactly what I would have. Probably, I think my major design flaw with the map is the center ring, because it's open space or the wormholes or the wormhole planets. So it's not really something that you can easily tinker with, because you want the outsides to be pretty decent, so that way you have someone like Sar to go out there. I think the major thing I would do is I'd throw the gravity rift into the middle too, just to really mess with somebody. Because again, I'm a lunatic, and let's be real, that's kind of funny to somebody. But otherwise, with this style of map, it's not going to be balanced. You can't balance it. When Matt and I were originally talking about the design of the map, his major concern was, it's not that you're looking at planet types anymore. It's how many 2-planet systems does everyone have that they can just start stacking PDSs onto?
Right. It was so terrifying. The idea of just how quickly people were going to get PDS2 and just start bombing each other. Exactly. That's why Extra was such an amazing pick in that game.
And I must commend the players for not just going with this will just be a stall out fest. We're just going to do this now. But that's really it. I'm very happy that I did not do what my original idea was, to put the supernova someone randomly, because I feel like the supernova has no place in this map whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, because the outside ring just needs to be, like you said, kind of this weird wasteland of the rest of things you need to get points. So if the supernova's out there, its only option is in that outer ring, and then it's just not even a thing. It doesn't exist, really.
Exactly. And even having the nebula out there doesn't feel great, just because then you're just having the stall for somebody to go, oh, well, now I have to stop my ships in here. All right, I guess I'll wait a turn. But I mean, that's the major thing.
Yeah, I think so. I think that I really like that, because what it felt like to play on that map was it felt like at any point someone was going to throw a command counter down in an exciting way. And that was my favorite thing about it, was that every single turn you could see someone being I'm activating this system, believe it or not, and now we're going to fight here.
Right.
And there were a lot of, I think I do feel though that did get a little obscured by all the other crazy wonkiness. But especially in the early game, that it was a constant feeling of well, let's see, because especially I do a lot of calculation of how many command counters everybody else has, and how many of them can access different parts of my, because you never know what people's action cards are. So a lot of times I will just see even if somebody can only bring a small fleet to strike at me, I don't know what they have. So maybe they have a play in mind. So for me, it was a nightmare, because my brain was constantly evaluating all the different fleets that could reach my home system or reach. So most of the time I just sat in I just tried to build up as large a fleets as possible and just sit there and be all right, so even if somebody comes at me, at least there's this. But that was kind of an exhilarating way to play, honestly.
Exactly. And it's not supposed to be something that, like I said earlier, it's not supposed to be something that's balanced. We're not going for, this is tournament level now. This is, what can I do to really mess with somebody's normal perception of what Twilight Imperium is, and give them something for the people who have played 100 games. They need something new. Let's be real.
And to a certain degree, that's sort of why I always come back to you for maps, is because I know that you have that intent. And when we do streams, a lot of the times we are trying to kind of very intentionally work outside of the bounds of TI, because I don't know, I've just always been afraid of how many people are really just going to watch a nonstop stream of a regular game of TI. I want people to see things that are going to make them laugh, and see them, have things that are going to be outside of their experience. I want them to experience something new, which is why using your maps are always so fun. I'm interested in kind of pulling back from that conversation, though, to talk a little bit more about how people can use these philosophies for their own maps. Since you make so many, kind of working backwards from specifics of that map. What are some of your other favorite variants on maps, Mac? What else do you like to do, or how are different ways you try to challenge yourself when building a map?
So the major map I'm working on right now is the one you alluded to in the Holiday Spectacular preamble. I'm trying to figure out a way to make a 3-galaxy map. So for anyone who didn't listen to that, a 3-galaxy map is exactly what it sounds like. You have 2 side galaxies that have 3 home systems in them each, and typically they're connected by a wormhole. The wormhole leads directly to Mechatol Rex in a much smaller galaxy. The problem with building this map, however, though, is that everything is so far away. You have 2 separate games going on right now, where you've got 3 people playing on one side, 3 people playing on the other side, and maybe someone will go in the middle.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny because what you allude to is also a thing that was just a straight up normal variant in TI3, but that was after many, many planets got added that they started making all these bigger, weirder maps, and I played on one time that was actually kind of a step further away from that, and my experience was exactly what you're describing, Mac, which was just that like everything was so far away that the game just was this kind of like slow crawling slog. Like it wasn't actually that much fun because it was so slow to play on. And this is in TI3 where there was a lot more available movement. So that kind of map in TI4 where it's kind of difficult to get really far really fast, it seems like that is certainly an even higher risk.
Exactly.
For that kind of a map.
I think just from going over some ideas that I've had in my head and comparing it with how TI3 evolved with Shards and Shattered Empire. Once we have an expansion that grants us 8 players, I feel like that would actually work if you're able to tinker it a little bit. So just as a little bit of an insight into the map I'm creating, the idea behind all of my maps is that you're always still 2 or 3 movement hexes away from Mechatol Rex, just like a normal game. So in this one, rather than the 3 galaxies having an outer ring where the home systems are, then an inner ring, then finally the wormhole. Everything was placed right next to the wormhole. And if you can do that with a 4-player map, which is going to be hard, something's going to mess up, and it might work better. But the problem is now that then you just have all these people 2 hexes away that are just going to fight each other instead.
Right.
So it depends on what kind of systems we get in an expansion. It depends on the other thing I think we need is a wormhole nexus for it.
Yeah,
that's a big factor in TI3 maps too. Is that opens up so many opportunities.
Yeah, and like I feel like you could theoretically use, if you have someone that's willing to mess around and do crazy things like I do, and have extra little tokens and use the Create system as a little wormhole nexus, you could kind of mess around with it just with extra Create tokens in the actual system itself. But that's the kind
and
of
honestly,
thing I'm
the map
right
you're
now.
describing has really weird implications for ghosts anyways.
Exactly.
Because then ghosts doesn't have to go through the central system. They can go from one home system area to the other very quickly, and it's just a very strange idea there. For those that don't know, too, the Wormhole Nexus was a system in TI3 that had 1 planet in it, but had an alpha and a beta wormhole. So you could get to it from any wormhole and then go out of any wormhole, essentially. So that's kind of what we're describing, is something that is a further connection between these 2 disparate major system areas.
The other major variants that I've been into making maps for are... right now I'm trying to make a shaved 4-player map that kind of messes with the rules a little bit. Shaved 4-player map, normally a 4-player map has the full system just with the home systems placed in weird places. Well, now the sides are cut off. Pretty simple, but it cuts down on the Cold War aspect of 4-player maps, which everyone hates.
Yeah.
And then...
including me.
You just don't like 4-players at all, Hunter.
That's true. But that would help. If the map was better, it would help.
Exactly. And then everyone's favorite hyperlanes and the just the 5-player, because let's be real, the trade good method is not great for 5 players.
It's not great. Yeah, describe that for people. Let's keep working our way kind of through the different variants that any player could have access to. So yeah, Mac, describe the hyperlanes for me, because I think there's a lot of people out there who aren't really sure what we're talking about when we say that.
So hyperlanes, as I use them, is you have a 5-player map. But traditionally in a 5-player map, again, it's a full map. But the players, if you're looking at it as a clock with the middle player being at the 12 o'clock ring, you have someone at the 7 o'clock, the 5 o'clock, and the 12 o'clock who gets extra trade goods. Instead of doing that, you just cut out the 6 o'clock slice completely, and they connect to each other now. Some players will put a planet system in the middle of it, some people won't. But that kind of makes it so that you don't have an inherent advantage where you just have this extra slice that someone at the bottom can come and get, and that also just has random 4 trade goods that can boost an entire first round into something that's completely different than normal.
Yeah. And people have complaints about this because the typical argument is that it messes up the objectives. So the important part to any sort of warp zone map where you're removing a bunch of system tiles, more so than you ever would. I mean, you end up removing 6 system tiles when you do a warp zone. So the important thing is don't remove systems randomly. I mean, you do need to be intentional with the systems that you get rid of. That's why this becomes more of a intentional map making rather than like a weird map making process. You kind of have to invent these rules. So the big point there is if you're removing 6 systems, make sure it's essentially what the hand of one player would be is how I usually think of it. Get rid of 2 anomalies and 4 planet systems. And within those 4 planet systems, make sure they even out within the traits that you're removing. If you can make it be 2 cultural, 2 industrial, 2 hazardous, that's perfect. Or 2 of one and 1 of the other 2. Something that keeps it a little bit balanced on the traits, because if you remove 4 planet systems and 6 of those planets are hazardous, obviously you just made hazardous planet trait objectives essentially impossible.
Yeah.
So when you make these new maps, you have to take those considerations in, and the only reason we recommend them though is because you end up getting you turn the asymmetry of a 5-player game into essentially a symmetrical experience. You are recreating a 6-player game.
Exactly, and that's a major complaint that a lot of players have. Like any players that I've played with, the trade good variant doesn't work. It's too powerful for the people who do get trade goods, and it doesn't balance it out correctly. So the community coming up with this variant has helped a lot, I feel, in helping to make creative maps, interesting maps, and maps that are actually playable for non-6-player games.
Well, and what's funny about the warp zone is technically, yet again, that's something that in TI3, like FFG put out a version of that. Like that was an officially released map that existed, was the warp zone. It looked completely different and was even more complicated because you actually had to use wormhole tokens.
Right, you had to specifically mark it, basically.
Yeah, but
it's like they had lanes that were you could only stay in one lane or something like that. I don't know.
And it still works that way, but it got very confusing. The main thing people don't like about 5-player maps is visually it takes a minute to kind of readjust. And for the 2 people on either side of the warp zone, they typically kind of forget that they are adjacent to each other, essentially. And so, a lot of times they'll forget to trade together, or they'll forget they can fire PDS if they have PDS too. Right. Weird little things like that. But once you get used to it, it does take, maybe one full game of playing on it before you're like, okay, it feels normal now. But I don't like going back to any other way of doing 5-player games. And in fact, we have tried others. We've seen people try maps that are just balanced without using trade goods, but use the entire system. But played on one so far, and it did not work out in a way that I enjoyed. It just shifted all of the power to the 2 players that, aren't surrounded on either side. So I still stand by Hyperlane, Warp Lane, whatever you want to call it, the Warp Zone being the best option for a 5-player game.
No, of course. And I will say, for anyone who's playing in person, not on Tabletop Simulator or whatever, if you have Twine, you can literally mark the hyperlanes very quickly. We had to do it for a game I had in person, and it just made everything infinitely easier to try to figure out who was adjacent to everything.
For sure. So what's fun too is to kind of keep exploring this headspace of warp zones. I know for myself, I've tried to create a map that uses warp zones in a different way, and I know Jensen from last week's game has created a 4-player version of the same thing that I did with 3 players, which is to use lots of warp zones. So I have a 3-player map called the Trident, which you can find on the Twilight Imperium subreddit's wiki. So if you go to reddit.com/r/wiki/maps, That's like a big repository of a bunch of maps. And in there is my 3-player Trident map, which uses 3 separate warp zones. And I had to be very, very specific with the planets I left in. But it is a playable map that has all objectives possible on it, despite removing 18 system tiles from the map.
Ooh.
So it was a big undertaking, but I've played on it once with Alec and Jensen, and it was a fun game. It completely changes the dynamic of a 3-player game into something that feels more like a very tactical, like you're going to fight. I mean, you are absolutely going to. The problem with a typical 3-player map is the players are so far away from each other that it is kind of the slowest version of TI. But with this map, you're all right next to each other, and Mechatol Rex becomes a bigger problem. And I don't know. I basically suggest it to anyone if you want to try a 3-player game that is much more faster and much more contentious. Give Trident a go. And the same goes for 4-player games with what did he call it? The Pitchfork or something like that. Jensen has a map that's a 4-player map on that same wiki.
Yeah, it's the Pitchfork. I have it up.
Yeah.
I did have a question about that map since you brought it up.
Sure.
Because I haven't gotten a chance to play it, because obviously I don't get to play it on a lot of games, unfortunately, right now. What was the design intent around keeping the 2 different warp zones on it?
The wormholes or the warp
zones? Wormholes, sorry, not warp zones.
So the wormholes exist purely to, A, keep ghosts relevant, because without any wormholes, ghosts don't get to do anything interesting at all.
Yeah.
And also, there's a secret objective where you have to have ships in the alpha wormhole and the beta wormhole. And it just, I never have been a fan of removing the option of wormholes altogether. So although the planets, Lodor and Quan, could not make it into the map because there's just not enough room to mess around with that, you need the wormholes to be available so that objective can still get claimed. Again, my goal with Trident was to make a map where you could play and you don't have to remove anything else from the game. You're just removing system tiles. You don't have to get rid of objectives. Every objective is possible. There are enough tech skips. There are enough planet traits of every type, and you have the wormholes, so you can score any type of objective. And there are a total of 3 anomalies, which means you can get adjacent, 3 systems adjacent to anomalies. So effectively, it is still Twilight Imperium with nothing else changed except for lots and lots of systems removed.
Would you say it is very difficult though? Because you're making this sound very hard now.
I would not play the map if you're like not prepared to get into fights. The map absolutely requires fighting to accomplish anything at all. To score more than half the objectives, you will butt heads with each other. And in fact, even in our first playtest with it, we even debated, I may add 3 more planets around Mechatol, which kind of cover up part of the warp zone. But we did actually have a problem of it was very, very easy to cut people off from Mechatol. Since there's only 3 systems surrounding Mechatol, which means all somebody has to do is take 2 of those systems and one person take the other, and one person is 100% cut off from access to Mechatol, which again means, okay, well, you got to fight through a lot more stuff. And it's just at every decision point, you have to fight. I mean, you just do. So it's also really resource starved as a map. I mean, each slice it's a 4-6 slice, it's a 3-8 slice, and a 4-7 slice with really good systems in between. So you're going to fight over the equidistant systems, and you're going to need to fight because you're not going to have enough money to accomplish anything without doing that.
Yeah. Wow.
So again, just the whole game is from the get-go. You're like, oh gosh, I'm just going to have to start fighting him. I cannot survive and do anything if I don't start jumping on them. I mean, honestly, if 2 players really wanted to, they would. It is a smart play on this map to team up against one person right away and try to eliminate them. I mean, that is like an incredibly viable approach to that 3-player map.
That's so you to make a map where that's something that would be that just has like a mean streak to it.
Well, and so why do we do this? Why do we change maps all of the time? Why aren't we just playing Twilight Imperium?
Because it's fun.
What is the reason?
Because it's fun.
Okay. But Mac, I'm curious what draws you into wanting to do new maps versus just straight up doing normal competitive build style. Why do you push away from that?
Actually, this started because of you guys. So, you guys posting in one of the Patreon channels to have someone make a map. That's what started everything. Because
you just got hooked.
Exactly,
it was a drug that we fed you.
Exactly. Plus, I know from having friends who are streamers, especially with streaming board games, especially a game as long as Twilight Imperium,
right?
There's got to be something that keeps people interested, or you're going to have one or two people in the chat that are just like, I love Twilight Imperium. This is my life. So that's what started me on making maps that were different, but not necessarily that broke all the rules. Then I got bored of that and decided, no, I want to break rules now.
Yeah, it's funny too, because I've always avoided breaking too many rules, purely because in TI3 there was a community mod, which lots of people still use to this day, and it's called Shattered Ascension. But they had a thing called Star by Star, which is where you don't even have to have hex-shaped systems anymore. And even in your multi-system map, Mac, the three systems still abide by some sort of logic within a hexagon. Star by Star, you just have these amorphous blobs, and home systems are in completely random spaces. You'll have home systems that are adjacent to each other, and they do a lot of work to make sure those maps are balanced. But for me, I was never interested in going down that route, mostly because initially Shattered Ascension required a lot of new rules, and before Tabletop Simulator was a thing, you had to download the PDF. Sometimes you had to make your own components. It was initially very difficult. They have since made it much easier to adopt Shattered Ascension. Now it's still in a pseudo TI. It's essentially TI 3.5 is what Shattered Ascension looks like now. And there's a really great community for it. And I know they have a separate Discord that they're always looking to add people to. But for me, I was just always hesitant because, I don't know, I wanted to play something close to standard TI. I didn't want to shake it up too much, but I don't know. The more we try to do these streams, the more I'm willing to start to kind of push away from that.
Yeah, I think it's crazy that you just brought up Shattered Ascension for the first time. I think this is the first time we've ever talked about him on the show, right?
Right. Yeah, it is. We've never really brought it up, but it was initially a very scary system, but there's so many people now that play it that it would be very easy to learn because you've got a whole community there ready to teach you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this pushes too, at least for me, the original intent to stop playing by the rules was because it always just felt like we were playing on the exact same map. In TI3, with normal competitive build, Mechatol Rex is a graveyard surrounding it. Everyone puts all these big systems next to themselves. If you get a lucky draw, you end up with an amazing system that you really can't be stopped. But more importantly, you get a couple people who have really terrible draws and their whole game is ruined because there's nothing else. So that was the very first problem we ever ran into, where we were like, well, what if we just kind of slightly modify how this game is played so that we can maybe make it a little bit more balanced? That's why we started doing the cooperative build. And plenty of people still argue that cooperative build ends up making kind of the same map every single time.
Yeah.
So I think that's why there's a desire from the community to constantly shake up how you decide to build the map. I know for me nowadays, I would rather play on pre-made maps because I know half of our players typically are just like, I don't care what the map looks like. I just want to play TI. So I spend time away from the table just making maps so that then when we sit down, it's like, here's a map. There's a theme to it. That was kind of the entire thing with the Patreon tournament, was like, we want to have a bunch of maps for each round that have a goal in mind that essentially still follow all the rules of TI, but offer something different than competitive build would do, or what cooperative build would always end up doing. If we just create the map ahead of time and have it sitting there, we can have a thematic kind of game that follows a certain sort of meta rule within that game. The Patreon map we have right now is very much this sort of thing that pushes everybody towards Mechatol Rex and forces you to fight in the center of the map rather than very much fighting in between you and your neighbor.
Yeah. I will say with the tournament map, I feel like that's, at least now with the systems we have, that's as balanced as you're going to get while still having it fun, because every home slice is different. Like, you have different things you have different races that are going to want to be in different slices. You have to consider what you want to do throughout the game. You've got to make sure that it works with the objectives you get dealt. And since that is randomness in the game, you have to account for it. And with the map you guys have created, you guys have done a good job of eliminating as much of that variability as possible to where everything's achievable, but maybe not in the exact same way. And I feel like I'm going to say this, and I think it's kind of a little bit ludicrous, but at the same time, I'm a firm believer of it. If people start building maps that slightly defy the rules, not necessarily breaking the rules entirely, but I feel like that will help them be a better player, because now they're having to think of ways to do things in certain slices or in certain positions, and then that'll be able to translate to, oh, well, I've had a system like this before. Now I know how to get 3 anomalies when they're on the other side of the table.
Yeah,
well,
that was
a big goal of this tournament. That's why we decided to go with this drafting method, is because exactly what you're describing is certainly what I seek out in games, which is I want you to be specifically trying to acquire a certain type of slice because you want to play this faction on this slice. Being just kind of getting a lucky draw of a slice is not as interesting as like, no, I want to make this active decision. That's why Hunter and I we pushed so hard for the drafting being a part of our specific tournament, is because I think those are both the decisions we like to see. That's not the only type of decision. And at the Gen Con tournament, we saw really brilliant decisions get made in competitive building. It's just that we wanted to do a different style. And I think that's kind of what we're getting at with all of this, is it's about keeping TI fresh, right? The whole goal here is not to completely change TI because we think original TI isn't as good. It's that we wanted to get a new kind of map. We want to get a new kind of game, and we want to constantly change what is accomplishable on a typical TI map.
Mm-hmm. And that's ultimately my goal, is doing what's different and making it fun. Because let's be real, this is a board game. We're all here to have fun. Some of us, yes, are here to win tournaments. Unlike Jensen, it seems, because he didn't win this last week.
Man.
Jensen and I currently, Jensen doesn't know, but him and I currently have a rivalry that's unfortunately going to get on hold for a while. But yeah, so thank you for whoever beat him last week. But realistically, we're all here to have fun. And that's my main goal, is to make a fun map that someone will go, why did I do this? Like EJ. In the Holiday Spectacular going, did you see the map? That's when I gave up. I'm like, yeah, well, I'm sorry you gave up, but it was fun. You know it was. Let's be real.
It was funny to watch.
Exactly.
I wanted to call out something specifically, and I hope I'm not wrong about this, but the first map you made for us was the 100K downloads stream, right? When we celebrated getting 100,000. Was that it?
I don't remember that map.
It had all the best systems adjacent to Mechatol.
That was a Mac. Yeah.
And then the Gravity Rift was like one. Like it was like the 5 best systems, and then Gravity Rift at like 12 o'clock. I loved that map. That map was so much fun to play on, and it was weird. It felt like at the time a revelation for all of the best hexes to be right there in the center. And I just wanted to thank you, because I remember I played on that map as Extra, and I won, and I love Extra, and I feel like it's really hard to win with Extra, and there was a lot that worked out well for me. But yeah, I just remember really, really digging that map.
I'm glad you like the map. I will be completely honest. I don't remember making that map. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. So if anyone erodes this and said, no, it was my map, it's your map. I promise I'm not going to take credit for it.
That would be great. Our first errata directed at somebody else.
Right.
That would be like a fun new thing that somebody else got called out. That would be great.
Yeah, it's all right though.
Well, I think that kind of wraps up this conversation. I think that's the main thing I wanted to cover. I don't know, Mac, do you have any big points that you want to talk about just within map making in general, or types of maybe what's a teaser for the next kind of Mac map aside from this wormhole?
Ooh,
thing?
yeah.
What are other ideas you want to explore in future maps?
So the major map I want to work on is the 3 galaxy map that I've hinted at right now. But otherwise, the next map, the only teaser I will tell you is I'm sorry, Hunter.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Oh wait. I remember this thing. Okay. That's a great teaser. I'm sorry, Hunter.
That's it? That's all?
That's literally
it.
Okay.
The follow-up to that is look forward to a future Space Kitty episode to see the results of this disaster. But yeah, let's call it there with an ominous warning to Hunter.
And just Mac, me, and then the rest of the audience is just sitting here like, what is going on now?
Specifically against you and towards you and despite you.
Okay. Geez.
Mac, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being on the show. I want to thank you for all of your support just over the many months
Of course.
that you've been with us, and you're always on the Discord as a fun person to talk to. So I just really appreciate you being a part of the community and kind of helping us have more fun with the game. You have certainly made Hunter and I both have a lot more fun playing.
Yeah,
TI.
you have successfully made the game more fun. I can say that for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Thank you guys, of course, for doing the podcast and having me on.
Thank you, Mac. And I think Hunter and I need to jump over to Errata. There will be some things to talk about last week, but again, thank you, Mac, for being a part of this show and this community.
Yeah. All right, so let's get this errata done in this like very extra long episode today.
Yeah, okay.
You guys are just getting so much with this tournament.
Content.
Yeah, geez. So we only really have one piece of errata because last year, it was a whole year ago. It feels like a year ago. Last week we talked just about basically the first game of the tournament. But we did have some interesting errata some discussion anyways, that happened between a listener and Jensen, who played as Jolnar in that game and kind of now famously lost. It's kind of becoming, it would annoy me to no end that me losing a game of Twilight Imperium is such big news to everybody. Like, honestly, I haven't talked to Jensen that much. I have become such a huge fan of him through all of this, like, because he must be great. He must be great because of how much people are like seem pretty excited about him losing a game.
Yeah,
like I've lost so many games of Twilight Imperium, and people just aren't like, "Oh, good, great,"
Right.
So yeah, he must be.
I want to
really
read
good
the
at
first
this.
half of this, and then you can read Jensen's response.
Okay, that works.
So, LMAO31 said, Jensen, sir, reporter Flacco News here from Mechatol. How did you manage to lose with a start like that?
Well, I had a plan to win in the status phase and expected the Ghost player to take either Mechatol or the extra home system. I didn't say anything, though, because I didn't want the Arborec player to move his flagship from the Alpha Wormhole. The Ghost player didn't notice the extra threat and took my home system instead of extra, which also kept me from taking it. I should have announced the danger and taken my chances with Arborec. That's a very specific reference that if you don't have the game quite in your head, you might not get.
But the point is, in the final round, Extra just kind of got handed the game because nobody noticed he was going to win. And the fact is that actually a couple people noticed it, but in Jensen's case, and what cost Jensen the game is opting to try to be a little bit more of a subterfuge play and not reveal that, like, hey, Extra is definitely the target, because the only way he can win is if he knocks out a kind of a poorly defended flagship, but he couldn't let that thing get away. So a little bit of defense on Jensen's behalf, let him kind of reclaim some of his dishonor, or whatever you want to call it.
Oh, whatever. His trade was awesome. He had such good trades. All right. I'm a Jensen boy right now. I'm wearing my Jensen shirt. My Go Jensen shirt.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, I'm thinking Jensen. If we do wild cards in this tournament, which who knows, maybe we'll do wild cards. What does that even mean? I don't know. I'm not a sports guy.
We might have them though, and it'll be wild.
Yeah. Actually, I think maybe we should do a stream after the tournament where we do like the most famous losers from the tournament.
Everyone who almost had it, but completely got robbed or something like that.
The losers bracket.
Get invited to a special game to reclaim their honor.
Yeah.
Hey, I want you to go to Space Cats Pod at Space Cats Pod on Twitter for game updates and announcements. I want you to go to our Facebook, Space Cats Peace Turtles, for announcements, and you can also ask us questions there. Go to the Twilight Imperium subreddit to see our episode posts as well as all the other posts. There was a really good post this week of someone giving an incredibly detailed list of defenses for Sardak Nor and why they should not be a bottom tier faction. And it is amazing. It is like a novel.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's really good. You can go to our Board Game Geek for discussion with RoboFish and a calendar that doesn't exist. You can go to our Patreon to please contribute to our Patreon because it helps us do more things with the show. It also gets you a lot of fun benefits, like you get to play games with us. You get to have episodes like today. If you're a Space Kitty, you get to be the producer of an episode of Space Cats Peace Turtles. So consider joining. Our Discord is where you can also pick up some of those benefits, lots of conversations, and votes on things like the Steve Martin Fan Club and the Galactic Council, which we need to do a Galactic Council episode. We're a little bit behind on that. Please rate our podcast on your app of choice, especially Apple Podcasts and iTunes. It increases visibility and gets more people playing Twilight Imperium.
Yeah, so I'm a comedian as well, stand-up comedian, Hunter Donaldson. You can check out my YouTube if you go to Hunter Donaldson Comedy. Actually, that's not even what the YouTube channel is called, but if you put Hunter Donaldson and comedian into your YouTube search bar, you'll find like 3 clips that you can watch if you just want a little sample of my comedy. If you want to come see me in person, I live in Portland, Oregon, and I do shows all over town all the time, although not a huge amount this month. But you can see me every single Thursday at Earthquake Hurricane, which is a very good stand-up showcase that starts at 8 p.m. at Ford Food and Drink every Thursday. I'm also going to be at No Pun Nintendo, which is a stand-up comedy show that happens at an arcade in Portland called Ground Control. And that show will be on January 17th, starts at 9. That show in particular is really weird because they don't turn any of the arcade cabinets off, and there's a lot of them, so it's very hard to hear anybody. And it's kind of just a weird show where comics get drunk and yell at people, which if that's the kind of rowdy energy you're into, it is a blast. If you are excited about like a quiet, nice stand-up comedy show where you appreciate the craft and the art of stand-up, not that it is art, not that I'm saying it's art, because it most certainly isn't.
Hard stance by Hunter Donaldson.
Yeah, no,
comedy, not art.
I don't know what it is, but it's not art. One other thing I'll be doing, which is actually this one is actually worth your while. There's a very good show that I honestly have no business being a part of, called Brunch Box, that happens at the Hawthorne Theater. That show I will be hosting, and it is on January 23rd, starts at 8. That is a really cool opportunity for me, and will be super fun. So you should come to that. I don't know. I feel like there might be tickets to that, or I don't really know. So you would have to go to the Hawthorne Theater to find out. Gotcha. Thank you.
I want to thank some Space Kitties. I want to thank Mac, InMapsWeTrust, the cartographer of chaos. I want to thank him for the episode. I want to thank Jimbov, Dustin Doom, Frederick Durston, Nathan Swenson, and Yin for Life. I also want to thank our players, Imson, Mark, Furious George, Dodonko, Alex, and Dimitri.
Oh, man, I owe Imson, the winner, cheesy bread. I still owe him a cheesy bread.
What's so funny is Imson is the player that last week filled in for the player we stole from a game, and then this week won a game. So I feel like we owe Imson like 4 pounds of cheesy bread. He's just like so far behind on cheesy bread.
I have a plan of what I'm going to do. Imson will get his cheesy bread. But
he said he's been trying to find a place that even serves cheesy bread. I mean, he's from Europe, so I don't know if that's kind of an American delicacy, I guess.
All right, well, I got to figure out where he lives because I got a plan.
Okay. Imson, hit us up. Hit Hunter up on Discord. Let's do a play of the week. Do you want to read it or you want me to read it?
I want to read it.
Okay.
This one is from Robert Feldkamp. I'm Mentak in a 4-player game. I had a red and yellow skip in my slice, so I ignored Cruiser 2 to rush Mirror Computing and War Sons with Assault Cannon. Whoa, okay. But the round after I researched War Sons, round 3, we got the War Sun agenda, where others could ignore War Sun prereqs, and they lost sustained damage, and it passed. Round 5 started with 5 War Sons on the board, and people knowing that I had the threatened enemy's secret objective. Have a ship adjacent to a homeworld. Due to experimental battle stations ruining that play for me in a previous round. Okay. Hakan's last action could have been to fortify the last system I could score threatened enemies with, but they instead chose to try to destroy my War Sun and 3 fighters, which were the ships I needed to score the point. To try to claim destroy their greatest ship. Okay, so Hakan was trying to claim destroy their greatest ship. He brought a War Sun, 5 fighters, and a cruiser, a fight he should win. First round, he only scored 2 hits, where I landed 4. That's so crazy. I had a shields holding, so round 2 was my War Sun and 3 fighters against a War Sun, cruiser, and a fighter. We each scored 3 hits.
So it would have been War Sun versus War Sun next round. My heart sank. It would most likely be a draw, but I had a long shot. I played Courageous to the end for one of my base fighters that was just destroyed. I rolled a 6 and then a 10. With Hakon's War Sun down, I survived a few fighters thrown at me by Nalu to move next to Hakon's homeworld, my next move, and with no way for Hakon to retaliate, I scored first with leadership to win the game. Destroying a War Sun with a Courageous to the end via fighter was a fun way to win. It's kind of Star Warsy.
It's kind of Star Wars.
It's kind of Star Warsy.
You remember that? You remember that rule that existed in TI3 that was an absolute nightmare? That
the Star Wars rule.
The Star Wars rule. The trench run rule. Yeah, this is so crazy. I've been talking a lot recently, like on the Discord, that I'm dreaming of a 14-point Mentak game in Slice of the Gashly. Like I just want to force that to happen on people and let everyone else get their like Magic Christmas Land setup for each faction. I want to play that on a stream. I want everyone to just like Darien Slice as Yin, Mentak, Slice of the Gashly. Whoever makes sense in every single slice. I want to do that game, and I want to do this. But to hear that then the War Sun agenda came out and completely crushed the impact of having those early War Suns is like the most upsetting thing ever. If anything, that's the like anti-play of the week. More so than the like the hero fighter, the trench run of the end. I feel so bad for a Mentak that works so hard to get War Suns and then loses all the benefit of War Suns.
Honestly, I think the moral of this episode, along with all the great map talk, like the side B of this episode, is that Courageous to the end says destroy.
Right.
That word there is destroy. I didn't remember that it said destroy there.
Yeah.
But it says destroy.
It says destroy, and that's a big.
That's a big word. That's a big.
It's such a big word for so few letters.
Yeah, it's a big word. That's a crazy word. When you see destroy in Twilight Imperium, that means business.
Thank you for listening to Space Cat's Peace Turtles, and thanks to Ben Prunty for the use of his music. You can find more at benpruntymusic.com and benprunty.bandcamp.com. Pax Magnifica, Bellum Gloriosum.